Ask how ancient humans traveled the world, and you already have a picture in your head. Someone standing at the edge of the known looking out. A decision, a departure. Hold onto that picture. We are going to take it apart. Because nobody left, there was no departure. For almost the entire story, not one human being on this planet ever set out to go anywhere. Start with the part everyone thinks they know. Humans came out of Africa. True, but not once, and not the way it gets told. There is a jaw in a cave at Mislia, in what is now Israel. It belongs to our species, and it is between 177 and 194,000 years old. There is a skull fragment from Epidema in Greece that may be older than 200,000 years. So people like us were standing in Israel, and possibly in Europe, more than 100,000 years before the migration you were taught about. And here is the part that matters. They are not your ancestors. Those populations died out. They left no descendants alive today. What happened to them was not dramatic. The land they walked into already had people in it, Neanderthals, who had been handling that climate for a very long time. And over thousands of years, the newcomers were absorbed or squeezed back out. The dispersal that actually stuck, the one every person outside Africa descends from, happened much later, around 50 to 70,000 years ago. So the story is not one brave departure. It is a door that swung open and shut for more than 100,000 years, and almost everyone who walked through it disappeared. Now the harder question. When a population spreads across a continent, what does that feel like from the inside? We can put a number on it carefully. The best measured human expansion we have is not the one out of Africa. It is farming, spreading across Europe between about 9,000 and 5,000 years ago. It moved at roughly 1 kilometer a year. 1 kilometer a year. A human generation is about 25 years. So in one generation, the edge of that world moved 25 kilometers. A morning's walk. Nobody in that chain ever experienced it as movement. Nobody packed. Your children lived where you lived. Your grandchildren lived one valley over, because the fishing was slightly better and the neighbors were slightly worse. Repeat that 2,000 times and you have crossed a planet, and not one person in the chain ever thought of themselves as going anywhere at all. That is the trick your picture is playing on you. You are imagining a journey, because a journey is a thing a person can have. This was not a journey. It was a species leaking downhill for 2,000 generations. Which brings us to the most famous image in the whole story, the land bridge. You picture a narrow neck of ice and rock, and a line of people walking across it into an empty continent. Almost none of that is right. It was not a bridge. When the sea level dropped, what appeared between Siberia and Alaska was Beringia, and at its greatest extent, it ran about 1,600 kilometers from north to south. Not a corridor, a country. And it was not empty ice either, it was steppe. Cold, dry, almost treeless grassland, grass and sage and low scrub, productive enough to feed woolly mammoth, wild horse and steppe bison. If you had stood on it, you would not have thought you were on a crossing. You would have thought you were somewhere. And they did not cross it, they lived there. Genetics says the ancestors of every Native American population sat in that region, cut off, for thousands of years before they ever entered the Americas around 16,000 years ago. How many thousands is still argued about, and the argument is not small. Work on mitochondrial DNA suggests a pause of up to 18,000 years. Work on the Y chromosome suggests something closer to 4,500. Take even the short number. 4,500 years is about the same as the gap between us and the first pyramid ever built. Generations were born, grew up, had children and died in a homeland that is now sitting under about 50 meters of cold water, and none of them were crossing anything. They were just at home. Everything so far has been drift. People following food one valley at a time, with no destination and no plan. Then about 3,000 years ago in the Pacific, the pattern breaks. The Lapita, the ancestors of the Polynesians, moved out into remote Oceania. And this was not drift. We can prove it was not drift. Run the real winds and the real currents through a computer, and the major voyages simply cannot happen by accident. Boats do not float that way. Worse, or rather better, they sailed southeast, into the prevailing trade winds, waiting for the seasons when the wind reverses, which meant that if they found nothing, the wind would carry them home. That is not being lost. That is a plan with a way back. And they carried animals and planting stock with them. You do not load a canoe with livestock and crops because you are drifting. You do it because you intend to arrive somewhere and stay. Somewhere in the Pacific, 3,000 years ago, a human being looked at a completely empty horizon, knew there was no guarantee of anything out there, and went anyway. As far as we can tell, that is the first time in this entire story that anyone actually traveled. The oldest fossils of our species are about 315,000 years old, so we invented going somewhere in the last 1% of our time on Earth. Step back and notice the strange thing sitting underneath all of it. A slow, weak, hairless ape with no claws covered every landmass on Earth except one, not by deciding to. So what made it even possible? Not boats, not intelligence, at least not at first, the body. In 2004, Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman published a paper arguing that our genus is not built for walking with running as a bonus. It is built for distance. Long springy tendons in the leg that store and return energy. A ligament at the back of the neck that stops your head from bouncing. An enormous gluteus maximus that barely does anything when you walk and fires hard when you run. An arched foot that works as a spring. And no fur with millions of sweat glands instead. They date the package to Homo erectus, roughly 1.9 million years ago. And their point about the result is the one that should stop you. On endurance, humans match or beat the animals we think of as runners. Dogs, horses. That sounds like the sort of claim nobody could ever test. Except there is a town in Wales that tests it every June. At Llaneltid Wells they run a race called Man versus Horse. About 35 kilometers of road, trail, and mountain, runners against horses and riders. For 24 years, the horse won, every single time. Then in 2004, a runner named Hugh Lobb finished in 2 hours and 5 minutes and beat the fastest horse by 2 minutes. And in 2007, another runner did it again. Over a mile, a horse will humiliate you, and it will not be close. Give it hills and heat and most of a day, and you are in the race. So how did ancient humans travel the world? They did not. They followed the food. They had their children slightly further along than their parents did. They stood in Israel and died out, and stood in Israel again 100,000 years later. They lived in a country under what is now the sea. And after 2,000 generations of nobody going anywhere, their descendants were on every continent on Earth. And then at the very end, in the Pacific, one of them looked at an empty horizon and chose. Both of those are still in you. The machine is in you. That is not a metaphor. The tendons, the neck ligament, the sweat glands, the arched foot. You are carrying a piece of engineering that was tuned for covering ground before anyone in your line had a word for a map. And so is the other thing. You have felt it looking at a ridge line, or down a road that goes somewhere you have never been. That small pull to find out what is on the other side, for no reason you could defend to anybody. For almost all of our history, that feeling had no outlet and no name. It just moved us one valley at a time, until there were no valleys left. I blame evolution, go for a walk. Not because it is good for you, and not because you are going anywhere. Because something in you has been doing it for 2 million years, and has not been told to stop.